By far, the #1 question in my DMs and inbox is, how do you like your reliable iron? That's it. That is the thing that people are dying to know. So why is it that people are so curious about this? It's because as quilters and sewists, we use our irons all the time, almost every day. And they do play a really important role in the outcome of our sewing results. Not to mention, they can be kind of expensive. So it makes us quilters and sewists really want to make sure that we are spending our money on our irons very intelligently. So that's why I'm going to do a deep dive today on the reliable Maven 140 IS. It's this tank-based model right here. And I'm going to do a super in-depth review to answer the question for you, should you spend your money on this iron? Hey there, I'm Shelly and I'm a quilter, a bag maker, a long armor, and I have been using and loving my reliable iron for years now. However, because I get so many questions from people about the current models, I reached out to Reliable and asked them to send me a couple of irons that are their most updated version so I can give you all the scoop on what's available right now. We're going to be covering tons of information about this iron, so I don't want you to worry. If you've got a question about it, I'm sure I'm about to answer it in this review. I'm also going to put a table of contents in the description below so that if you have a real specific question like how hot does it get or how heavy is it, you can just skip forward and find the exact information that you're looking for right now. Let's talk about the design and size of this iron. So first of all, first thing you probably notice is that it's not like a regular iron, it's a cool iron. And what I mean by that is that let's talk first impressions. I know that whenever I show this or I show up somewhere with this, people have questions and they are drawn to it. So there's something very exciting about this design that just attracts people. So how is it different from a regular handheld model? Well, for starters, in a handheld model, you fill the water in this handheld and then you are going to use this to use the steam. With the tank-based model, it's got a large base that is meant to hold a large amount of water, which should allow you to iron much longer without having to refill this. The base is separate from the iron head. This is what I'm going to call an iron head. I don't know, is that what we call it? Sure. And they are attached by this very long hose. Okay, so that's how the two of them talk to each other. And all of the controls, except for the steam trigger, which is on the head, are on the base of this base unit. And this is where you control everything about the iron is on the control panel at the very back. It plugs into a wall like a normal iron. And then let's talk about the size. Because as you can see, it is a beast. Okay, so it is true that a handheld model is going to be smaller than this tank-based model. Duh. That's because this contains everything all in one petite little package, and this is a much larger beast. It is taller, it is wider, it is longer. Everything about this is larger than this one. So if you were looking for something that was more portable, I would recommend a handheld one. But if you're looking for something that is larger and can iron for longer, then this is going to be a better choice for you. Let's talk about the portability of it. So it does have this locking feature, very convenient, where now you can use this to lift the entire unit. So that locks the head to the base, and then it just means that you can carry them around. Because this hose is so long, you can place this base, like the entire base, on your ironing board, or if you've got an ironing board that's got like that second chunk area where you can put an iron on it, that would be a great option for this. Because the hose is so long, you can have the base way over on one side and then you can be ironing on your board using this. I don't believe there's any ironing board in the world that would be so large that you couldn't reach the end of it with this hose. But if you had an ironing board with that extra space on it, that would be much appreciated, because I will tell you that when I put this on my regular size ironing board, it did feel like this took up valuable real estate of my ironing board. So the Maven 140 IS is large and in charge. One thing I'll say about these reliable irons is that I've never met one that didn't feel really well built. So it does feel like a very sturdy unit that is not going to break or crack, or I don't know, it just seems like it's made of really nice components, as in this hose is not flimsy, it is strong and thick, and this headpiece, the head unit, feels solid. So it doesn't feel heavy, we're gonna get into that in a minute, but it it feels solid. So I have to say that I'm really impressed with the quality of this iron. It just like looks and feels good, you know? People just want to touch this thing when I bring it around. Is it just me, or is the topic of putting water in your iron one of the most controversial things in the entire quilting universe? I think it might be. Here's my personal opinion. If I'm gonna buy an iron and I'm gonna spend the money on it, I need to be able to put water in it. And that is because I believe that seams that I press using steam turn out so much flatter and so much better than seams that I use a dry iron with, even if I spritz that seam with a spray bottle of water. If I'm gonna buy an iron, I gotta put water in it. And so I'm really happy to tell you that Reliable irons do very well with water in them. It's kind of their whole deal. They are really good at producing steam. The Maven 140 IS has got a large tank on the front of it. And let's talk just sort of generally about best practices when it comes to putting water in them. So in this large tank, which holds 1.5 liters of water, you can remove it and take it to your kitchen sink to fill it up, because it's got a very large spout on it where you can just fill it up, bring it back, stick it on your base, iron all day without any problems. And in the owner's manual, in one place it says you're fine to use tap water. And that is because the iron also has an included cartridge. So this is an anti-calcium cartridge. However, if you were going to use tap water, I would recommend, as does the manual, that you did a self-clean on your iron about once every month. And you can check the owner's manual to see how to do that, but you just gotta push a couple buttons and then it runs a self-clean and it gets rid of the calcium. So in another spot in the Reliable manual, it tells you to use distilled water only. So you make of that what you will, but if you live somewhere that's got soft water, then you might be totally fine using tap water. If you're somewhere that has really hard water, if you really wanted to prolong the life of your iron, you could use distilled water. However, the very most important thing that I was told by the folks at Reliable is that if you want to extend the life of your iron, you need to remove the water from it and not let it sit with water in it for any amount of time. So let's say it's Tuesday night and you just finished ironing and you know you're gonna come back on Wednesday morning. It's fine to leave the water in it overnight if you're going to use it again the next day. However, if you're going away on vacation or you know you're not going to be using your iron for any amount of time, they recommend that you take the water out of it, because apparently that is the thing that is going to kill an iron faster than anything else, is leaving water in it. You can select the amount of steam that you want by using the controls on the back of the iron, and you can control whether there is steam on or off by using the trigger on the head. So this is how you're going to activate the steam, is with this trigger. And if you want continuous steam, you need to continually hold down the trigger. One thing I'll say about this trigger is that it's really lightweight and it feels perfectly situated when you are holding the iron head. So it doesn't feel like you have to, I don't know, put your hand in a weird position to get to that trigger. It just feels very natural to have your hand on that and to have your finger continuously on that trigger. That's not a minus for me. So the steam that comes out of this thing is strong, and there is a lot of it. So there's lots of holes on the head, and I never found that I was short of steam when I was using this machine. I also found that this machine lasted more than a full day of quilting with heavy usage and heavy steaming. So this tank that holds 1.5 liters of water really will last you potentially multiple days between having to fill up that tank. So for me, that is a huge plus. One of the most important factors about an iron is the temperature regulation. So if you're ironing something really delicate like silk, not in my life, but okay, if you are, you need to have a lower temperature. And if you're ironing something that's more sturdy, like a cotton or a linen, you need this thing to get pretty hot if you want it to be effective at either removing creases or setting a seam. So let's talk about the temperature on the Maven 140 IS. So the internet tells me that if you're ironing cotton fabrics, you ideally want your iron to reach a temperature of 400 degrees Fahrenheit. That's nice to know, but do you have any idea if your iron is reaching 400 degrees Fahrenheit? I'm gonna guess that yours is not. And why am I saying that? Because I bought myself a little temperature gun and I tested every iron that I could find. And I'm here to tell you that most of them are not gonna reach 400 degrees Fahrenheit. However, this one does. In my tests, I found that this iron was the only one that I've ever come in contact with that got anywhere close to 400 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, I will say that when you leave it on and you set it at the highest temperature, it, like any other thing that does heating, will cycle on and off. So what that means is that it doesn't just turn on the heating element and just keep the iron super boiling hot the entire time, but in fact it goes through cycles. And so when it reaches its peak temperature, it turns off the element and then it's going to drop in temperature, and then when it reaches a certain temperature, it's going to turn the element back on and it's going to come back up and heat. And so you're going to find that if you were to measure your iron, you would find that, like anything else, it's going to cycle in temperature. However, this one does get to 400 degrees, or like something real close, when you're ironing with it. Honestly, I don't know that you need to have something that gets this hot, but if that is your jam, if you're into super hot irons, this is the one for you. I say that because I tested my old reliable iron and the other new handheld one that they gave me, and neither one of those got exactly to 400 degrees, but I will tell you that my irons produced super flat seams, even when I'm dealing with things like linen and really tough seams that I'm trying to set. So points for reliable for making irons that really do flatten your seams. How about comfort? Because I know that is a big question that a lot of people have for me about irons is, how does it feel in your hand? How heavy is it? How will it feel when I iron with it? So let's start with weight, because I think that is the number one question people ask me. And people want to know, how heavy is it? Okay, the joy of the Maven is that all of the weight is carried in the base, and all you need to do is worry about the weight of the head. So I weighed this and I found that it weighed 1.2 kilograms, or 2 pounds, 13 ounces for anybody that works in pounds and ounces. So it's actually pretty hefty. It doesn't feel like a lightweight plastic iron that you would buy from, say, Walmart. And that's important because you do need to have some heft when you're ironing your seams. So for me, I know that I want to place it on my seam and have this be the weight. I don't want to have to like press down on it. But this is certainly more lightweight than either of the reliable handheld models that I own. And certainly when you fill up the handheld models, they weigh a lot more. So if mobility is something that you are concerned about, this is a great choice, because although it feels sturdy in your hand, it is much lighter and much easier to move this head around than it is than, say, a fully filled up handheld model of an iron. So if mobility is your concern, you're probably going to want to look into a model like this. One thing I did notice about this iron, and this might be a me problem, was that because this head is lighter weight than what I'm used to setting down oftentimes my iron in a sort of horizontal to me position. And I found that because this head was light and this cord was kind of heavier, it's heavy duty cord, and oftentimes my base was quite far away, I did notice that the iron had a tendency to sort of pull itself into a vertical position, but I noticed I was able to get around that by just simply pressing my seams when I had the iron in a vertical type position. But I don't know, I guess it's just something about me, is that I'm used to laying out my blocks and then pressing them, and then I found that my iron was often getting pulled and sort of shifting around. So that was something that I just kind of had to wrap my head around, but you might not experience that problem. You might find that you're able to use this iron without any issues whatsoever with it in a horizontal position, but I did find that mine tended to shift. So I did better when I was using this in a vertical type position. One more thing that might be a me issue is the fact that and I think it's because this head is smaller than what I'm used to, and because it's shorter than most, let's say, Like the head of this iron is shorter than a regular handheld iron. So I feel like when I'm normally ironing with a handheld iron, my hand is sort of higher up in the air. And when I'm ironing with this model, my hand feels like it's much closer to the surface that I'm ironing. And I noticed that when I used steam and just, let's say I put the iron down and I pressed the steam trigger and I held my hand in that position, it felt like the steam was coming up and was making my hand uncomfortably hot when I held it in that position. And I think it is because my hand is just so much closer to the hot surface and the steam. So I was able to get around that by simply using the steam function and then either removing my hand, so I could just set it down if I needed to, press the steam, and then remove my hand, in which case I did not get burned. Not to say I ever got burned, but it got hot. I will say my hand got hot, uncomfortably so. Or I could either use the steam and move the iron. But I did not find that it was comfortable for me to set it down, use the steam, and then hold my hand in that position, which is something I am able to do with my handheld irons because, again, my hand is so much higher off the ground. So that is something to think about. You might need to kind of modify your ironing technique, or maybe you don't need to modify your ironing technique because for whatever reason, this is not going to affect you the way it affected me. But that was something that I noticed about this in terms of comfort, etc. Something to think about. I have one client named Lorna who sends me quilts that are the flattest quilts I have ever seen in my entire life. So one time I had to ask her, Lorna, how is it that your quilts are so much flatter than all these other quilts that I'm getting from my clients? What is your secret? And she told me that it was because she was using a reliable iron in which she put steam, and she found that that was the combo for her to get the flattest seams she'd ever seen. So based on that recommendation alone, I went out and got myself a reliable iron, and I have never looked back because it is true that my seams are super flat with these irons. So let me tell you what I do and what my process is. Yours might be different, but here's how I get super flat seams using these irons. And okay, caveat, I will tell you that I didn't measure my seams. Like I can't tell you exactly what thickness they are, how many millimeters thick they are, but I can just tell you when I press a quilt block using this brand of iron, they come out super flat. If I go to a retreat or somewhere else and I borrow somebody else's iron, I'm often super disappointed because I feel like this iron is doing nothing. That is how it feels to me when I use brands that are not reliable. I really feel like they just don't make a seam flat, and it makes me wonder, what is the point of this iron? So let me show you how I iron my seams using my reliable irons. Here I've got a quilt block where I've sewn on this last piece of fabric, and I just need to press that into submission. First, I'm going to start with a dry iron, and I'm going to press the seam as it was sewed, and I'm just doing that to set the seam. Then I'm going to flip it over, and I'm going to press the fabric away from the center of the block, again, not using steam. And I'm doing that because I don't want to warp this seam. If I use steam at this point, I could end up with a really wavy quilt block, which is not what I want. Then once I've got that ready, I'm going to hold it over top of my seam, which is in the correct position, and I'm going to apply some steam. I'm just going to use the trigger and then hold it in position by then moving my hand out of the way, and I'm going to move it down the seam, and I'm going to apply some steam, move my hand out of the way, and just make sure that it is nice and steamed. I found that when I use this iron, my blocks all turn out the right size. So I don't have to do any sort of trimming. And I think that's a combination of both the 1/4 inch seam that I'm using when I'm sewing them on, but also my pressing technique, because you can definitely press a quilt block out of shape if you are using too much steam or if you're ironing the wrong way. But I found that I get nice flat quilt blocks that are exactly the right size when I use my reliable iron. So A+ for that. And this little handheld version I think works really well for small projects like this. One really big plus of this machine is that it is super easy to use. It's not complicated, it does not have a bunch of buttons and a bunch of functions. It's really simple. You plug it in and it turns on. So when you do first plug it in, it's going to turn itself on to eco mode, and from there you can tap the temperature button if you want to change the temperature and increase it. Once it's at max, you can also hit it again and it'll go back down to eco mode. One thing I do like is that the beep is quiet. So when you push the button to change the temperature, that's how loud it is. It's very, very quiet. I, as somebody who lives in a house with a shift worker and is often sewing while my shift worker is sleeping in the next room, it's really important to me to have a quiet iron. So I like that about this model. One thing I do wish that I could change though, is that it has an auto off function. So after a period of time when you have not been using the iron itself is going to turn off the element. So the whole thing doesn't turn off, it's still ready to go. It's sort of in standby mode, but it just turns off the heating element to the head. I wish I could turn that off. That's a safety feature I wish I could undo, because when I'm sewing, I often am away from my machine long enough, away from my iron long enough, that it turns itself off. It goes into standby mode. And that's annoying for me because then I gotta go back in and in order to turn this back on, in order to take it off of standby mode, you simply have to hold your finger on the temperature button and then it will restart itself. It does heat up very quickly. So either at the start of the day when you plug it in or anytime that you take it off of standby mode, it takes less than a minute to come back up to temperature. So I know I'm complaining about something that's not really a big deal, but it is something that I wish I could change and fix about this iron. I wish I could disable that auto off. But other than that, I mean, it's really simple. I don't have much to say about it. You plug it in, turn it on, and it just works. So I love that about this iron. So to sum up, the reliable Maven 140IS is a sturdy, dependable, dare I say reliable machine that is really well made. It is going to heat up very quickly. It's going to let you iron all day long because of its massive 1.5 liter tank, and it's going to produce tons of steam. That's going to help you get really flat seams, and paired with its really high temperatures that it's going to reach, I think you're going to be really, really happy with the results you're going to have when you use this iron. I think it is really well suited to anybody that has got mobility issues because of the lightweight, maneuverable head. And I think it's also a really great fit for anybody that's got extra room because this is a large base and it is going to take up some space. So if you could set it off to the side of your ironing board or on a special stand attached to your ironing board, I think that would be a really great fit. But what can I say? I mean, it's sexy, it's cool, it's definitely gonna get people talking, and you're gonna get a lot of questions about this iron if you bring it to your next guild meeting, I promise. Okay, well, so that's everything I have to say about this iron, and if you liked this review, you'll definitely want to check out my next one, which is going to be about the Reliable 270IR, which is the handheld model that I was using throughout and showing you throughout this video. I can't wait to show you that video, and until then, I'm wishing you happy quilting and flat seams.